What does the mysterious Maya civilization hide? In this video, you'll learn far more than just about pyramids in the jungle. We'll break down how the Maya built their city-states and why their architecture still astonishes archaeologists. We'll explain how their legendary calendars worked, why myths about the end of the world still surround them, how the Maya counted days and recorded history using their own script, and why it took scholars decades to decipher those signs. We'll also answer the question of why this great civilization eventually collapsed. And above all, how, centuries later, the ancient cities were found again. Why are the Maya not just history, but a culture that still lives on in the language, clothing, rituals, and everyday lives of millions of us? Suggest topics in the comments and subscribe to the channel. Bedtime history stories come out here every day.
From origins to flowering, how the Maya civilization began. When scholars today talk about the ancient Maya, they can easily cite precise dates, list dozens of known cities, and mention rulers' names and complex calendars. Yet this story did not begin with stone giants in the jungle, but with much humbler settlements, almost lost in the green of the tropical forests of southeastern Mexico, Guatemala, Belize, and parts of Honduras and El Salvador. There, where the humid air is saturated with the smell of leaves and water, and rivers flow in a slow, unhurried rhythm. For thousands of years, the geography of the Maya world, which shaped the lives of its inhabitants, was not limited to a single landscape. It was a remarkably complex and varied region. The dense tropical forests of Petén, the rolling highlands of Chiapas, and the plains of northern Yucatan, where water often disappears underground, forming networks of subterranean rivers and cenotes, karst wells that played a vital role in future towns and settlements. It was here, amid evergreen forests and stony plains, that about 3,500 years ago, the first signs of a settled life appeared, as hunters and gatherers learned to grow maize, beans, squash, and chilies, and began building permanent houses of wood and reed, grouping them around open plazas where the community gathered. Earliest such villages documented by archaeologists belong to the pre-classic period, which for the Maya begins around 2000 BCE, when only small groups lived on the sites of future great cities, united by the need for joint labor and protection against the dangers of the forest. For example, in the region of modern Schuylkill on the Yucatan Peninsula, traces of settlements and ceramics have been found that already displayed a recognizable style typical of the Maya area. Over centuries, these communities became more complex and organized. By the end of the Middle Preclassic, around 1000 BCE, the first large settlements appeared, with public buildings made not of wood and reed, but of stone and clay. One such place is Ceibal, or Ceibal in Guatemala, where archaeologists found not only domestic remains, but also early platforms on which pyramids and temples would later be built, as well as pottery fragments with geometric designs already bearing Maya motifs. A key feature of early Maya society was the development of agriculture. Thanks to maize, beans, and squash, people could not only survive, but also accumulate surpluses, enabling the emergence of craft specialists, priests, and rulers. At Chahalpech in Belize, finds include not only granaries, but also stone tools for fieldwork and ritual items indicating complex religious practices even at such an early date. Gradually, a social structure took shape based on kin relations and the authority of elders who acted simultaneously as priests, chiefs, and judges. Ethnographic studies suggest this tradition persisted for centuries and has roots in the era when small villages first began to cluster into larger communities. A crucial milestone was the rise of writing. The earliest examples date to the late Preclassic, roughly the 2nd century BCE. In San Bartolo, Guatemala, wall murals and inscriptions show that by then, the Maya already used a complex hieroglyphic system to record religious texts and calendar data. An astonishing discovery, as writing was long thought to have arisen only in the Classic period. By the start of the Classic period around 250 CE, the Maya world was a network of independent city-states, each with its own dynasty, patron gods, and sacred places. But the cities themselves, Tikal, Palenque, and Copan, will be the subject of the next chapter. For now, the main point is this. The great Maya culture began with small communities of farmers and hunters, with the first stone platforms and shrines, with the first hieroglyphics written by priests trying to capture the movement of time and propitiate the gods so that their fragile young world might endure.
Cities in the jungle, the grandeur of Tikal, Palenque, and Copan. By the Classic period, Maya civilization was no longer a mere network of farming and craft settlements, but a constellation of autonomous city-states where political power, religion, and art intertwined in a complex hierarchy, reflecting both societal organization and the Maya worldview. Among many Maya cities, 3 stand out: Tikal, Palenque, and Copan, names that remain key monuments of world archaeology. These cities were not just places to live, they were centers of religious, military, and administrative power. Every plaza and pyramid had a precise place in an overarching plan governed not by chance, but by a system reflecting earthly and celestial order. Tikal, in the heart of Guatemala's Petén, is considered one of the largest and most powerful Maya cities. At its height, between the 6th and 8th centuries CE, its population may have reached 50,000 to 100,000, requiring sophisticated provisioning, especially water management, in a landscape without permanent rivers or lakes. The Maya built extensive reservoir systems to capture rainwater in the wet season and store it for the dry. At the center of Tikal rise the Great Plaza and surrounding complexes, including Temple 1, Temple of the Great Jaguar, and Temple 2, Temple of the Masks, stepped pyramids about 45 meters and 40 meters high. Shrines on their summits hosted key rites and, it is thought, sacrificial offerings to sustain cosmic order. Temple 1 is linked to the ruler Hasawa Chan Kawil I, who reigned in the late 7th century CE. Beneath the pyramid lies a tomb identified as his, with rich grave goods of jade, shell, and inscribed ceramics, evidence of Maya artisan skill and a source for Tikal's political history. Palenque, in today's Mexican state of Chiapas, is famed less for size than for the refinement of its architecture and art. Its most famous monument, the Temple of the Inscriptions, is a 9-tiered pyramid, about 24 meters high. Inside, archaeologist Alberto Ruz Luillier discovered the burial chamber of the great ruler Kinich Janab Pakal the Great, who ascended the throne at 12 and ruled nearly 70 years. The temple's walls bear lengthy texts recounting Pakal's life and ancestry, making it a crucial source on Classic period history. Palenque also preserves the palace, a sprawling complex of halls and courtyards with a distinctive 4-tiered tower whose function, possibly astronomical, remains debated. Copan in western Honduras is renowned for its sculptural richness and intricate texts carved on stelae and stairways. Its hieroglyphic stairway, over 30 meters long and more than 10 meters high, has over 2,000 glyphs, the longest known Maya inscription. Built during the reign of Kak Yipyaj Kankawil, Yaxpasaj Chan Yopat, in the 8th century, it served as a stone book recording Copan's dynastic history.
After a partial collapse mixed the blocks, restoration has taken decades and is still not fully complete. Politically, Maya cities were organized around the Ajao, the supreme ruler, military leader, high priest, and embodiment of divine authority. The nobility included commanders, officials, court artists, and priests who maintained the calendar and rites. Farmers, artisans, and builders formed the majority, sustaining city life and participating in major construction and state ceremonies. Maya architecture was never random. City planning observed astronomical alignments tied to the movements of the sun, moon, and stars. Temples, pyramids, and ball courts occupied specific positions reflecting cosmic order. Maya cities were not just residential spaces, they were symbolic landscapes where every element served a unified design, joining art, power, and religion.
Calendar and Cosmos: How the Maya Counted Time and Understood the Universe. In a world of pyramids, palaces, and stone stelae, time was not an abstract idea, but a living force that governed all things and demanded perpetual reckoning and respect. Priests who oversaw the calendar and astronomy enjoyed special esteem, for their art determined when to sow and reap, when to wage war, when to offer sacrifices and celebrate dates that ordered society. The Maya used several parallel calendrical systems. Two principal cycles formed the core, Tzolk'in and Ha'ab, together making the calendar round. The Tzolk'in, or sacred calendar, had 260 days, created by combining 20 day names with the numbers 1 to 13. Scholars suggest its length may be tied to astronomical or biological cycles, perhaps phases within the solar year, or even human gestation, but no single hypothesis is proven. The Ha'ab, or solar calendar, had 365 days, 18 months of 20 days, plus 5 extra days called Wayeb. These 5 were considered especially perilous. The boundary between worlds thinned and divine protection waned, so people avoided travel, trade, and public events, observing fasts and seclusion. Used together, Tzolk'in and Ha'ab created the calendar round, in which a given combination recurs every 52 solar years. Completion of a 52-year cycle held enormous religious importance and was marked by renewal rites. The most complex and significant system was the long count, a linear calendar counting from a mythic era's starting date, corresponding in the proleptic Gregorian to August 11th, 3114 BCE. Its units were kin, 1 day, unal, 20 days, tun, 360 days, katun, 7,200 days, and baktun, 144,000 days. The popular belief about the end of the world in 2012 stems from the completion of the 13th baktun. For the Maya, this marked renewal, not apocalypse, much like a new century or millennium for us. Long count dates appear on many monuments, in Tikal, Copan, Quirigua, as well as in the Dresden and Madrid codices. The hieroglyphic stairway at Copan, for instance, records dates tied to the local dynasty's history. Maya astronomical knowledge complemented their calendars. Priests observed the sun, moon, Venus, and Mars. Venus held a special place, associated with the deity known among the Maya as Kukulkan, often equated with Quetzalcoatl in broader Mesoamerican lore, and seen as an omen of war and fateful events. At Chichén Itzá stands El Caracol, a round-walled tower with narrow windows aligned with key solar and Venus positions, one of the earliest purpose-built observatories in world architecture. The Dresden Codex contains the famous Venus tables, tracking its phases with day-level precision over long cycles, about 584 days, nearly the exact synodic period,
Similar tables address solar and lunar eclipses. For the Maya, time was cyclical. What happens has happened before and will happen again. According to myths recorded in the Popol Vuh, gods created and destroyed worlds multiple times before forming true humans from maize dough. The agricultural cycle and cosmic order were one. Precise skywatching and calendrics were therefore essential to survival.
Gods and sacrifice inside the religion of the Maya. Religion permeated every aspect of life, from fieldwork to warfare. There was no divide between earthly and divine order. Everything that happened flowed from the god's will and demanded daily ritual affirmation, whether through prayer, offerings of food, or more complex ceremonies. The Maya pantheon was diverse and layered. Instead of a strict hierarchy, there was a web of relationships and multiple manifestations. The same deity could take different forms depending on time of day, cardinal direction, or calendar phase. Among major figures was Itsamnaj, an ancient creator god and patron of writing, the calendar, and medicine. Often depicted as an aged figure, sometimes with jaguar traits. Cha'ak, lord of rain, water, and lightning, was crucial in an agrarian society. Shown with a hooked nose and fangs, sometimes in four-directional aspects: red east, white north, black west, yellow south. Rites for Cha'ak included offerings and at times human sacrifice into cenotes. At Chichen Itza's sacred cenote, archaeologists have indeed found human remains and precious objects. Evidence suggests most such sacrifices date from the late Classic and post-Classic, tied to increased religious political centralization. The sun god Kinich Ajav personified the daytime sun and was linked with royal power, attested on stelae from Copan and Tikal and on painted vessels. Ah-Puch, also known as Kisin, a death god, appears as a skeleton or half-skeleton and is associated with Xibalba, the underworld. Related imagery is found in elite tombs, including those at Palenque. Maya priesthoods were structured with ranks such as Achin, chief priest, Chilam, seer, and assistants. Training began in childhood and included literacy, astronomy, mythology, and ritual skills. Central to elite ritual were bloodletting rites, strictly regulated by calendar and status. Both noble men and women performed piercings of tongue, ears, and other body parts using obsidian spines or bone needles, objects found in ritual assemblages at Bonampak and Ozacton. Scenes appear in codices and reliefs. The image of cord pulled through a pierced tongue is documented mainly in the central lowlands. Human sacrifice existed, though its frequency in the classic is sometimes exaggerated by later accounts. Archaeology indicates such rites concentrated around special events, coronations, period endings, major wars. At Tonina, altars with human remains and blood traces have been found. Some displays lightly emphasized war trophies rather than routine religious practice. The sacred books, codices, made of amate or fig bark paper coated with lime, contained ritual instructions, astronomical tables, and myths. Bishop Diego de Landa burned many at Mani in 1562, yet 4 authentic codices survive: Dresden, Madrid, Paris, and Grolia, Codice Maya de Mexico, with the Dresden Codex particularly rich in astronomy and eclipse tables. Maya religion was an inseparable weave of mythology, astronomy, agriculture, and state ideology. Every offering, every prayer, every priestly gesture sustained the order of the world as the Maya understood it.
Writing and the secrets of the codices. How the Maya spoke and wrote. Among the most impressive Maya achievements is their writing system, a complex, multi-layered script used to record dates, rulers' names, astronomical tables, mythic narratives, and ritual prescriptions. Unlike most other pre-Columbian scripts, Maya writing could record extended texts, not just numbers or emblems of power. It was logosyllabic, combining signs for whole words with syllabic signs. While some 800 signs are known, around 300 were in regular use depending on period and region. Literacy belonged to trained scribes and priests, educated from childhood in science, mythology, history, astronomy, and ritual. The script crystallized by the early classic, around the 2nd century CE, with roots traceable to earlier regional traditions. Some of the earliest securely dated samples come from the late 2nd century BCE, notably at San Bartolo, where murals bear hieroglyphic captions for cult purposes. Maya texts appear on stelae, stairways, temple friezes, ceramics, and codices, accordion fold books of lime-coated fig bark paper with dozens of painted pages. Major inscriptions come from Tikal, Palenque, Copan, Quirigua, and Yaxchilan. Palenque's texts about Tikal the Great are especially detailed, documenting his birth, accession, key rituals, and even funerary details. Of the codices, the Dresden Codex includes astronomical tables, eclipses, Venus cycles, rainfall predictions with striking accuracy. The Madrid Codex is more utilitarian, with calendar tables, prognostications, agricultural and ritual instructions. The Paris Codex is fragmentary, but valuable for ritual and deity imagery. The Grolier or Maya de Mexico Codex, once doubted, was confirmed authentic in the early 21st century and focuses on Venus. Most codices were destroyed in the 16th century by missionaries. Landa's 1862 auto de fe is the most infamous. Of thousands of books, only a handful survive. Scribes, Aj-Tsib, held high status, often depicted seated with brushes and inkpots, surrounded by scrolls and codices. Inks used soot and mineral pigments, chisels of obsidian and hard stone carved inscriptions. Monumental texts could mix finely carved glyphs with more schematic forms. Decipherment long proved difficult. The real breakthrough came with Yuri Knorozov in the 1950s, who demonstrated the script's syllabic basis through analysis of the Dresden Codex and stone inscriptions, aided by comparison with modern Mayan languages. Thanks to Knorozov and subsequent scholars, roughly 80% of known glyphs are now read, though regional variants remain. For the Maya, writing was more than administration or calendrics. It bound the living to ancestors, gods, and the very flow of time.
Wars and alliances. Why the Maya fought one another. Despite the perfection of architecture, writing, and calendars, Maya political life was anything but placid. There was no centralized empire. Each major center was independent, with its own ruler and army. The political map was a mosaic of shifting alliances and wars. The Aja stood at the apex, surrounded by a developed nobility, generals, counselors, priests. Cities fought for control of trade routes, territories rich in resources, and human labor. The best-studied rivalry is between Tikal and Calakmul, two superpowers vying for hegemony for centuries. In 562 CE, inscriptions indicate Tikal suffered a crushing defeat by Calakmul, ushering in Tikal's so-called hiatus. Under Jasawa Chan Kawil I, Tikal later reversed its fortunes, defeating Calakmul and forging alliances with Dos Pilas, Naranjo, and others, as recorded on stairways and stelae. Dynastic marriages were key diplomatic tools. Princesses from major cities wed neighboring rulers, as texts from Yaxchilan and Palenque attest. Vassalage was another instrument. Defeated cities acknowledged overlordship while retaining internal autonomy in exchange for tribute or troops. At Quirigua, inscriptions recount its subordination to Copan and later liberation after capturing and executing Copan's ruler, Uaxaclayun Uba Kawil. Maya warfare sought not annihilation, but captives for ritual and display.
The murals of Bonampak show victors and bound prisoners in vivid detail. Late 7th century. Control of trade, jade, obsidian, cacao, and more was at stake. Armies were ranked. Weapons included spears, obsidian blades, atlatls, and wooden and leather protection. High-ranking warriors wore feathered headdresses and insignia recorded in texts. Victories were meticulously dated and named on stelae, sometimes with scenes of captive sacrifice, underscoring the bond between politics and religion. Even in the north, Yucatan, long seen as more peaceful, archaeology reveals signs of conflict. In short, wars and alliances were the rule, not the exception, an organic part of Maya life that shaped a civilization whose stone cities still rise above Central American forests.
The twilight of an era. How and why the Maya cities fell. Visitors who wander the plazas of Tikal, climb the pyramids of Copan, or study the reliefs of Palenque inevitably ask, how did such complex, carefully planned cities, once full of life, become abandoned? There is no single answer, but archaeology now points to several chief causes behind the collapse of the classic southern lowland cities: Petén, parts of Guatemala, Belize, and Honduras, in the 8th–9th centuries CE. Cessation of monument building, political decline, depopulation, and the end of new inscriptions. Meanwhile, the northern region, cities like Chichen Itza, Uxmal, and Mayapan, continued to develop into the post-classic, highlighting the regional character of the collapse. Climate change ranks high among causes. Lake cores from Yucatan and Petén, for example, Chichen Canab and Puerto Silio, show decades-long droughts beginning in the mid-8th century. A 2012 study from Cambridge suggested rainfall dropped to about 40% of normal, devastating agriculture and water supplies. Drought alone, however, likely would not have caused total collapse without additional factors. Decentralized politics meant that in resource crises, competition for water, fertile land, and labor intensified. Inscriptions from Dos Pilas record late 7th century wars and regime changes. Archaeology shows sieges, destructions, and mass outmigration. Similar patterns appear at Quirigua, which after a brief florescence declined. Overpopulation added stress. By the 7th–8th centuries, densities in parts of Petén may have reached 200 people per square kilometer, high for a pre-industrial society. Raised fields, terraces, and other systems sustained such densities, but with drought and soil exhaustion, they faltered. Around Copan, evidence of erosion and abandoned fields points to ecological crisis coinciding with political turmoil. Social tensions likely grew as sacral kingship faltered. If rulers could no longer ensure harvests and order, their legitimacy suffered. Though Maya inscriptions rarely mention uprisings, burned palaces, deserted administrative centers, and fire traces at places like Ceibal and Naranjo suggest internal conflict played a role. The fall was gradual, not a single catastrophe. At Tikal, the last dated stela is 869 CE. At Copan, 822 CE. Life continued in altered forms. Populations dispersed into rural areas, settlement patterns changed, and great power centers vanished. Spanish influence comes much later. When Spaniards arrived in the early 16th century, the southern classic cities had been abandoned for centuries. They encountered post-classic centers like Chichen Itza, and in Petén, Tayasal, the last independent Maya polity, which fell only in 1697. Thus, the classic collapse was not caused by European conquest, but by internal processes. Today, scholars view the decline as a layered process where climate shifts, ecological strain, political instability, and social factors intertwined.
less a single fall than a long transformation toward more dispersed, less hierarchical rural life.
Rediscovering the Maya, archaeology and the great finds of the 19th and 20th centuries. After the cities of the southern and central lowlands were abandoned, pyramids and palaces vanished beneath the forest, and the script was forgotten by most descendants. For Europeans, the Maya were rediscovered only in the 19th century, when documented expeditions began, starting a long, complex history of Maya archaeology. Among the first to describe the ruins was John Lloyd Stephens with artist Frederick Catherwood, who in the 1840s visited Palenque, Copan, Cabha, and others. Tikal was then barely known. Their books, Incidents of Travel in Central America, Chiapas, and Yucatan, popularized the Maya in the U.S. and Europe. Catherwood's drawings preserved details later lost to weathering and vandalism. In the late 19th century, Teobert Mahler systematically photographed sites like Yaxchilan and Piedras Negras, preserving their appearance before excavations. Large-scale digs began in the early 20th century. Chichen Itza was intensively studied in the 1920s by the Carnegie Institution and Sylvanus Morley. El Caracol and the Temple of the Warriors were documented in detail. Edward Thompson's dredging of the sacred cenote at the turn of the century brought up artifacts, many later sent to U.S. museums without proper agreements, sparking debates on repatriation. The Bonampak murals, revealed in 1946, were a sensation, showing warfare, feasts, and sacrifices with realism and dynamism not previously associated with Maya art. Lubanton in Belize is notable for its dry-laid masonry, unusual for the region and largely confined to a few late classic sites. Calakmul remained little studied until major projects began in the 1980s. It is now recognized as one of the largest Maya cities alongside Tikal. In the 21st century, LiDAR mapping revolutionized our view, revealing dense settlement, causeways, embankments, dams, and defenses on a scale previously unimagined. Chichen Itza, Tikal, Copan, and Palenque are UNESCO World Heritage Sites. Tourism is massive, and conservation programs strive to balance access with preservation. The 20th and 21st centuries thus saw the Maya not only re-enter science, but also the global cultural heritage, objects of wonder and serious research alike.
The Maya legacy, from myths to their modern descendants. Tourist brochures usually mention pyramids, calendars, and writing. Few pause to consider that the descendants of those who built Tikal and Copan are very much alive, one of the largest indigenous populations in the Americas. Unlike vanished cultures, the Maya endure as a living ethnic and cultural community, preserving language, traditions, and ties to the past thousands of years after their classic apex. Today, there are about 7 million Maya descendants, chiefly in Guatemala, southern Mexico, Belize, and parts of Honduras and El Salvador. In Guatemala alone, indigenous Maya make up as much as half the population in recent censuses. The Mayan language family includes over 30 recognized languages and dialect branches. Traditional religious elements remain widespread, especially in rural Guatemala and Belize. In Solola and around Lake Atitlan, communities still hold ceremonies honoring mountain and water spirits. Animal sacrifice, incense, and libations persist, often combined with Catholic rites in a unique syncretism. Festivals show this blend vividly. On the Day of the Dead, giant paper kites soar over Santiago Zacatepeques and Santiago Atitlan, a tradition with pre-Christian roots long woven into the Catholic calendar. Textiles and traditional dress preserve symbols seen on ancient reliefs and codices.
sun, maize, celestial and earthly motifs. Dyes are often synthetic today, but techniques and patterns are handed down through generations. The Popol Vuh epic holds a special place. Though the text we have was written down in the 16th century by missionaries from Maya oral tradition, its plots reach back to earlier myths. It tells of creation, cyclical time, and the succession of worlds. The Popol Vuh is studied in Guatemalan and Mexican universities and appears in Quiche community school programs. Modern states increasingly recognize Maya cultural and linguistic rights. Guatemala has an Academy of Mayan Languages and laws recognizing official status in indigenous regions. In Mexico, Yucatec Maya and other indigenous languages are recognized by law. A growing movement also revives the hieroglyphic script. Workshops, summer schools, and curricula teach both modern languages and ancient writing. Not just academic curiosity, but cultural policy and historical memory. Maya descendants are active in international forums on indigenous rights, including at the UN. For them, cultural and linguistic preservation is inseparable from contemporary struggles for social and political autonomy. The Maya are not merely a people of the past, but a living community, binding ancient heritage to the present. Those stone cities lie beneath forests, and the script once fell silent. Maya civilization endures, in speech, textiles, festivals, rites, and songs, showing that the memory of great epics can live not only in books and museums, but in the breath of everyday life for millions.